Hi, folks. This is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, the show where we talk about health and a lot of other cool stuff. Today, I'm really happy to be here with Michelle Tam, who's the gentle genius behind Nom Nom Paleo, which is, I have her book right here if you're watching the video version, and actually, her very own action figure, which we'll talk about on the show too. But if you haven't checked out Nom Nom Paleo, Michelle and her husband, Henry, they're some of my favorite people in the field. And I can't believe this is the first time that I've had them on my blog, but I think you're really going to like this show. We talk about how you can manage to withstand all of the dangers of shift work or working at night. I did that for a while, as did Michelle for years. And we talk about how to feed your family food and also why you should eat eyeballs and weird stuff, eat the whole animal, and the advantages of cooking something like a whole fish. So I hope you enjoy it. Also, I wanted to say thank you so much for your support for The Wild Diet, my book. We just launched it, and it's the feedback that I've gotten from you guys has just been so powerful. I tried to totally make this book way better than everyone was expecting because, let's face it, we've all read way too many diet books and most of them are really boring. So I tried to make this one really fun, and the recipes in it are ridiculously good. It's literally what we eat pretty much every day and every night. We had chicken parmesan last night with a bit of mint chocolate chip ice cream. And also I wanted to let you know that I've been on a bunch of different, like more than 40 or 50 different radio shows around the country. So NPR and the talk radio stations, a lot of AM stations in your area. Stay tuned. You might even hear me be interviewed on there. I'm also going to New York to record something on Fox, which is hilarious. But so stay tuned. I'm doing a lot of really cool stuff for the launch, and I hope to see you. I'll be in Austin at Paleo FX speaking and doing the Rob Wolf and Mark Sisson show. I'll join them on stage, and who knows what's going to happen there. And also, we have an album coming out with Denny, who's been on the show, a past guest. And there's just so much to look forward to. But firstly, I just wanted to say thank you so much if you've already picked up a copy of The Wild Diet. And if you haven't already, I hope that you'll consider it. I keep this show advertising free. And of course, obviously, we promote our own products sometimes, but I wanted to really make this show all about truth and the truth about health without any back scratching or corporate interests being involved. So I thank you for your support. If you haven't left a review for Fat Burning Man on Stitcher or the iTunes store, please take a moment to do that. And if you'd like to support the show, please go out and grab The Wild Diet, which is available everywhere at all sorts of different bookstores. And also, if you'd like to order it on the internet, Wild Diet is on Amazon, but you can go to wilddietbook.com and you can download a bunch of free gifts. We set up a whole cookbook for you to download for free and a bunch of other cool things. So go to wilddietbook.com and check it out. All right, so on to the show with Michelle Tam of Nom Nom Paleo. I think you guys are really going to like it. Thanks for joining us. Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thank you so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man. I am really excited to be here with one of my favorite people, and definitely someone who makes me laugh a lot on the internet and books. And with this thing, which I'm showing on the video version, you're one of the only people, Michelle, I'm here with Michelle Tam of Nom Nom Paleo, who has her own action figure. And when this came in the mail, I couldn't stop laughing. It's just like, you got this little skillet with bacon and eggs in it, your little book, a cleaver, and this beautiful little action figure. So congratulations. This is pretty much the best thing I've ever seen.
Thank you. It is probably, I mean, as I tell everyone, it's kind of a money stupid thing that Henry and I did, but we kind of do that. Like we do things that we want to do that are really fun and what we think are, hopefully kind of awesome. And we throw our money at it and, we just put it out in the universe.
And it always makes me laugh. It's like this whimsical, almost fantasy approach to life. I remember one of the best April Fool's things, I'll let you explain it, was a few years ago with, and it involved your kids. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, it was such a good April Fool's joke that I don't think that we have stopped putting up April Fool's posts and we just repost that post. But basically it was a recipe And I made it out like it was an old family recipe that was, brought down on, not on my side, but on my husband's side of the
Yeah,
family.
sure.
And it was called Tongzi Don,
Hmm.
which means virgin boy eggs. And so I think this actually does exist, because I think what happened was Henry came home from work. He's like, I just found something that we could totally do as an April Fool's joke. And he showed me this clip that was like on CNN or something about some rural city or like a rural town in China where they make these things, this egg dish where they boil eggs in young boys' pee. And I was like, wow, that would be really awesome. Like, it would be very paleo, and people would believe it because, like, we could put up this news clip, more Chinese, and. And so we did. And we thought we were being way over the top and
Yeah.
really jokey, because we showed our kids pretending to pee in a bucket. And we were talking about how, it takes a few days to collect enough pee. And then we like boiled it and we made these really gross gray looking eggs, but we didn't use pee. We used apple juice.
Apple juice.
And then we had our friends come over and pretend to eat the eggs. And there's a picture of my kids pretending to eat the eggs. And we thought we were the whole time we were just like trying to make it super clear that it's a joke. We're like, the fumes are good for allergies and blah, blah, blah. And we just got so many people who just didn't read to the end, because at the very end, finally, we're like, it was a joke, sucker.
Yeah.
But there were so many angry people. We're like, this is so gross. I want to barf. I can't believe you would do this. And can't believe you would do this to your children. And I'm like, no, it's a joke. It's April Fool's. So sometimes after that, we're like, well, first of all, we probably can't top this.
Yeah.
And secondly, you're like, there are some people who are really sensitive and don't have the same sense of humor we have. So,
Yeah, well, an April Fool's, not this past year, but I think the year before that, we had a recipe for mountain lion stew because we were living in the woods at the time. And some people thought it was hilarious. Other people thought it was not funny at all.
Yeah, it's like, it is a protected animal.
Right? It's a joke. But anyway, one of the coolest things about your blog, your brand, and everything that you guys do is the amount of fun that you're able to put into cooking and living and everything else. What inspired you to kind of bring that levity to this world that's often taken way too seriously?
I mean, paleo, how it's like right or wrong, and you have to do it exactly the right way. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just like our personality. That's just how I am. Like, things don't really get me mad. Like, if I get mad, I get over it really quickly. Like, I'm like, and then I forget. Which people have said that's like the secret to good relationships is if the woman doesn't hold a grudge. And I think that's why Henry and I have a really great relationship, because I have this like weird amnesia where I just forget that I'm angry. And so that's just kind of how, we live our life. And I totally understand. I mean, the whole point of paleo is that you have to start cooking your own food.
Yeah.
And you have to, pay attention to what you're putting in your body and how you feel. But, I love to eat way more than I love to cook. I mean, cooking is fine, but, and so I knew when I started paleo, when I started the blog, like I needed to make it as simple as possible to make great tasting food.
Yeah.
And to not stress people out about it and not say, you have to be perfect about making sure that your protein is like this and your fats are like this. And, it's like, this is real life. And you gotta, like, if you're that stressed out about food, you've got like other stuff to deal with in your life.
Right.
So you gotta just, kind of have a chill approach, I think, to life.
Yeah, totally. And you did most of this, your blog and your apps and your books and all that other stuff while cooking and coming up with all these recipes and doing it really well while you had a day job for the most part.
Yes. Well, a night job. So
night job, right.
Yes. So I worked as a night pharmacist at a hospital for 12 years. I mean, I worked at the hospital for 14 years, but for 12 of them, I worked nights.
Wow.
Which was a choice. People were like, oh, when are you going to get out? I'm like, no, I like working nights.
Yeah.
And so, the way I've blogged has kind of changed through the years. When I first started, I was like blogging like probably like 3 times a day because I was trying to like document what I ate for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because that's what I thought was most helpful, like to people, because that's what I would find most helpful.
Yeah.
And then that just got to be a little too much, because I literally would be like waking up, about to go to work, cooking something, taking pictures, and then like posting it. And I was like doing it on a daily basis and then going to work. And it kind of got to be a little too much.
Yeah.
And so then I quit my job, which was nice.
Yeah.
And
but weird, right?
Huh?
But weird. Like we were talking about this before the call. It's weird when that happens. Because when I started my show, I was doing consulting and playing lots of gigs as a musician. So another night job, you know, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I guess I have to like really, really do this now. And it's super weird. And you're also, you know, a mom, which makes things way more complicated.
Yeah. And it's funny because before, when I was working nights, I would have like, the in-laws would and my parents would take turns taking care of the kids on the weekdays. Henry would watch the kids on the weekends I was working. And so we had this really great system. But then once I quit my job, like the in-laws were like, hey, you don't need my help anymore.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. Like, you know, I will have to try to figure out how to do this, you know, around my kids' schedule. And so that's kind of something I'm still working on.
Yeah.
But I think it's working out really well. Like I love being home. I love being awake during the day. You know, I used to think I had the whole night shift thing like totally hacked.
Yeah.
And I had this whole like regimen that I did. I even wrote about it, and I talked about how this is how you survive the night shift. But then after not working the night shift for a while, I was like, you know, I feel so much better.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard to just overcome, you know, your circadian rhythms and to really thrive. Like my memory is much better. My mood is better. You know, there's just a lot of stuff that is better. But I mean, I understand like there have to be night shift workers, you know, or else, you know, you could never go to the hospital, you know, in the middle of the night, or cops wouldn't be working.
Sure.
But it's a tough gig.
It's rough. I remember when I was living in Austin, I was gigging a lot as a musician, and I was playing saxophone with this reggae band. And so I'd finish up my day job in consulting, you know, like wearing a suit and shaking hands or whatever, but oftentimes I'd work from home and telecommute. Finish up around 5, 6, and then, you know, I knew that I had to go on stage at like 12:30 at night. And I'm like, what do I do in the time in between? Because I can't go to sleep, and like I don't want to lose too much energy, but I'm so tired and like bored. And then I have to put on this big show playing saxophone until like 3, 4 in the morning, and then wake up, you know, at 6 or 7 for a conference call, you know, with all these people dressed in suits in DC.
See, at least with me, it was shift work, so I would have time during the day to like go to sleep.
Yeah.
But yours sounds crazier.
That was weird. And fortunately, you know, it wasn't every night, but it was, you know, I gigged like over 250 times for a few years there, and it was just a lot. But one of the biggest questions that we get from people is just like, I have to work the night shift. I don't really have options. What do I do about it? So what's your perspective on that? What can you do to hack it and make sure that, you know, you're at least mitigating the damage?
Yeah, so I do have a post where I delineate everything that I did.
We'll link to that on the blog post.
But I think the biggest thing is just making sure you have a solid block of sleep every day. And it can't get interrupted. You can't like wake up and go pick up your kids and then come back and take a nap. Like that just messes everything up.
Yeah.
Like, so I would, like my typical day would be, I would come home from work in the morning. I would eat a little something, but on my drive home, I would wear blue blockers. As soon as I'd leave the hospital.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I would wear blue blockers, and then I continued to wear blue blockers until I go to bed. I'd eat a little something. I would make sure I went to bed by a certain time, like by 11 a.m. And then my room is completely blacked out, and it still is, even though I haven't been working for almost a year.
Yeah, Vampire Den.
Totally.
We've got one of those,
and I have like earplugs. I had this special mask that I wore that was like perfect.
Yeah.
And then I would sleep until like 5 or 6 p.m. And nobody could bother me unless like they had to go to the hospital. Like Like that was very strict. Like I preserved my sleep more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd wake up, I'd like cook dinner for everybody. And then, we'd put the kids to bed and then I would go to work. And then at work, there were certain times that I would eat. And then, so there was just a very set schedule.
Yeah.
And I think even despite that, it's really hard not to be jet lagged.
Yeah.
And it would take me like maybe 2 days to get accustomed to night shift. And then I would work 7 nights in a row and then have 7 off.
Wow. Yeah.
And then when I was off, I would have to try to flip like immediately.
Yeah.
But
it takes a couple days. You're in like dreamland, right?
It does. But it was easier when I was paleo because I did night shift for 8 years, like just, what I guess the standard American,
sure,
like whole grain, low fat diet.
Yeah. I had one of those.
And so I felt better. So I almost feel like paleo maybe work night shift longer than I probably would have.
I see. Okay.
Because I was like, oh, I have so much more energy now. Like I don't have all this GI stuff I used to have. But then when I stopped, I was like, oh, actually, I can feel much better.
Yeah.
than, if I just hacked it and stuff.
Yeah, totally. I remember when we've been traveling a bunch, as I talked about before, but when we went to like Thailand and Indonesia, where the time is flipped on its head, right? Yeah. And you're on the other side of the world. It's just like, it's hard to even connect with reality for a few days. You're just in this haze.
Yeah. So that is one thing I think as a night shift worker, like I'm really good at adjusting, like when we travel, like Henry gets totally knocked out and like he'll come back from a trip to like India and he'll be like out for a week. And I'm like, see, this is when I tell you I need at least 1 day to recover from night shift.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But it is something because I did it every week that, I was able to kind of make my body get used to it, but it's not natural.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about, having a family and how you feed your kids. Because a lot of people just say that it's so hard and they don't have enough time. And I think we've all kind of felt that from time to time. So what do you do to make sure that your kids are always getting the highest quality food, even if you're, stretched on time and your husband as well?
Yeah, so that is totally, like, it took us a while to kind of get the kids on board. Like Henry and I, like, were full on paleo, and then our kids were not exactly paleo. So for a long time, when I started the blog, we were like, how do you feed your kids? How do you feed your kids? And I totally just wouldn't answer it. Or, I don't know. There are other people who have better answers than me. But then there came a day when I was like, why is it okay for us and we're not doing it for our kids?
Yeah.
And so then we're like, okay, we're going to get the whole family on board. And there's actually this whole section in our book about it because it wasn't easy. Like our older son, it was a lot easier because he has a much more adventurous palate. And as the firstborn, he's much more eager to please.
Yeah.
Then my younger son was like not having it. Like we used to call him like a vegetarian, except he wouldn't eat vegetables. Like it would eat carbs. And
I did that for a while too.
Yeah, right. And so I think what we just decided to do was just to cook one meal because my mom only cooked one meal for everybody. Like, I mean, it's a very, I mean, I don't know why we thought it was okay to just cook something separate because like my time is precious, right? And I'm feeding them crappy stuff. So we decided to just cook one meal, but we also made compromises. So it wasn't like I would make a super spicy, like mountain lion stew or whatever. It was like something that everyone would eat. And so those are kind of the recipes in my book and on my blog. There are things that appeal to everybody. And that's what we made. We wouldn't make a big deal about, whether or not they would eat it or not. But that's what we were having. And then now it's like I make their breakfast, I pack their lunch, and then, I make their dinner. So I'm in control of, most of what they eat. And so when they're outside of, or as I say, when they're out in the wild, like I let them make their own decisions. Like my younger son does have issues with gluten, and so he knows to avoid it. And he actually does a really good job of doing it himself.
Yeah. How old are they?
They are 7 and 10.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I think that we are at like a really, I think we're at a good place. Like I'm happy with how they're eating. And, but it wasn't, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are their favorite foods? Did you try to hook them in with like things that were disguised as,
No,
junk
no.
food that were healthy or?
No, like there are certain foods that they just really love. Like
Yeah.
crackling chicken is like the super simple
Mm.
recipe that I
Hmm.
make all the time, which is just chicken thighs with the skin on, but you remove the bone and you fry it until the skin is super crispy, but then
Cool.
the meat stays moist.
Hmm.
And so that is like their favorite. And so I make that. They like roasted broccoli. Like that's their favorite recipe. So we
Really?
probably have that. Yeah. They have that like we have that a lot,
Yeah.
maybe every day.
Hmm.
And there are other things that they just really like. Like they will, if I braise kale, they will eat braised kale.
Mm.
But then other things they hate, like they hate spinach. Like no matter how I try to make spinach, they hate spinach.
They
But
got to watch more Popeye.
yeah, I know that's probably the big thing. But like Big O burgers, which are these burgers I make with some sautéed mushrooms and bacon that's all mixed in, like they'll eat that.
Yeah.
And I'm actually really surprised. Like sometimes like, oh, they won't eat that. But then I just put it out there. I don't make a big deal about it,
Hmm.
and then they try it.
What about
And so I
snacks?
think it's just persistence and just patience,
Yeah.
and it'll just happen, you
Hmm.
know.
What
And I
about
think
making
sometimes,
snacks for them?
oh, there's a lot of like they love those sea snacks, those seaweed snacks.
Yeah,
They
those
like
things are great.
plantain chips. Yeah, they like. Luckily, they can bring nuts to school. Like
Hmm.
I know some schools have really strict nut policies, but they like nuts. They love the little those little applesauce things that are in all those like individual, which is
Yeah.
totally wasteful. But they really like those.
Yeah.
They're huge on fruit. Like my older son, he's not big on sweets at all, but like he loves watermelon. So like a treat is for me to go to like Whole Foods and get him a box of like cut up watermelon.
Hmm.
Like, hey, you want to go pick out a treat? And he'll like, yeah, I want that watermelon. I'm like, okay.
That's a pretty
Uh,
awesome treat.
it is, but he also makes other choices.
Sure. Yeah, I'm
So,
sure.
like, yeah. Um, but yeah, so in our house, we just stock stuff that we are happy that they would eat.
Hmm.
And we're not perfectly paleo. I mean, I don't think anybody is perfectly paleo. Like we
Yeah.
do have some gluten-free things here and there. But we are in the house, we're like gluten-free. And that's kind of how we roll.
Nice. Yeah. Can we talk about this? Your family or your old family cookbooks or like what your grandparents might have made for you. I think a lot of Americans are kind of missing out on that cultural heritage. I was
Mhm.
fortunate enough to come from a family that kept cookbooks for decades and decades and decades, and we'd throw them around at family reunions, and they had Crisco in them and crap like that. But at least it was there were some things that were very it was almost ritualized, like ceremonial even, like the food meant a lot and it always came with a story. Can you talk a little bit about how you work that into what you cook?
Yeah, so I grew up in a multi-generational household. Like I lived with my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, and my parents. And my mom, I mean, that's why, I mean, it's really hard to live up to her
Yeah.
standards.
Yeah.
But she used to work and she took care of us and she'd come home and she would make these elaborate, like 6-course meals plus soup.
Wow.
And it was, yeah, and it was all made from scratch. And it was just like, huh. But she never really let us help except to do like the really gross things. Like we'd have to peel the shells off shrimp or
Yeah.
like, wash the vegetables. So not fun or sexy stuff.
Hmm.
And so I didn't necessarily love cooking because I was always tasked with like the yucky stuff, which actually I think is really smart. Like now I'm like, I can't wait till my children have to do
Yeah.
all these things.
Right. Right.
Um, but it like all of my favorite memories are around family gatherings. Like
Hmm.
we'd always have everyone, like all my cousins and stuff would come to our house because my grandparents lived with us. And it was always around food. And I think it's really important to connect over food and to celebrate over food. And yeah, but the thing is, like Chinese sauces are filled with all sorts of bad stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so people are like, I need you to make, paleo Chinese stuff. I'm like, I'm trying, but it's really hard.
Right.
Like, because like so many of those sauces are filled with so many crazy chemicals
Mm.
and bad stuff.
Yeah.
Like how does this have gluten? I don't
Right.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gluten and MSG and
Yes.
worse. Like it's we love going to Asian markets to get
Mhm.
weird fruits and kind of cool foods and stuff like that. But a lot of times it's super hard to find, especially sauces, but anything that has
Yeah.
a sauce with it or on it or in it or anything like that. So what do you
Yeah.
do? Like I know that I've seen paleo or gluten-free fish sauces and stuff like that. Are
Mhm.
there other things that you can make from scratch? Like have you had success with any of that?
There is. I mean, you yes and no. I mean, I think I have made it where it's like more simpler tasting.
Hmm.
So like you can use coconut aminos in place of soy sauce, but then you need a little bit extra because coconut aminos don't, to me, have as much kind
Yeah, they
of
don't have
like
the punch.
yeah. So I add a little bit of fish sauce. Like I love fish sauce.
I do
It's like my
too.
favorite. It is, and you have to use it um, you know, discriminately. Like you
Hmm.
don't just like lug it on stuff. You just put a little bit and it enhances everything.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that's kind of how, and there are some substitutions you can do, but it's not always easy. So what I try to do is I kind of use the basic flavors of Chinese food. Like I
Hmm.
think when you add like scallions, ginger, and garlic, I mean,
Hmm.
that's kind of the holy triumvirate in Chinese cooking.
Yeah.
And then you add a lot of fresh herbs like cilantro. And those are kind of flavors that you associate with
Right.
like Asian food. And then I use a lot of like shiitake mushrooms because that also adds umami.
Yeah.
But in terms of like replicating like hoisin sauce or, oyster sauce, like that's really hard.
Yeah. What about the oil? Do you use like sesame oil or
Sometimes I use some, like you can get like cold pressed sesame oil as like a finishing oil.
mhm.
But in terms of like cooking oil, I use ghee a lot for high
Yeah.
temperature, which is not Chinese, but
Yeah.
I think it's a great cooking oil. And
Hmm.
now, and I use avocado oil and coconut oil, especially when I'm doing like Thai curries.
Yeah.
But it's hard because there's a lot of Chinese dishes where they call it like velvetizing meat, where they'll kind of like they'll cut up meat and then they'll like quickly fry it in oil, but
Hmm.
it's always like some canola oil,
Right.
right? And it gets this nice texture, or they'll make some sort of gravy in that oil, and so it's like you can't really do
Yeah.
that. And so it's kind of trying to find certain dishes that you can kind of tweak, but
Hmm.
there are other ones where I'm like, I'm not even going to try to do that because
Yeah.
it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because part of Chinese food is just making fast, delicious food, like all
Hmm.
those quick stir fries. But if you're going to all this trouble to make this crazy sauce and then the sauce and all
Yeah.
this other stuff costs so much money, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. But if you use those little cheat things
Hmm.
like you were talking about before, throwing some scallions in there and maybe like a
Hmm.
little finishing oil, you can approximate food,
Yeah.
and it's not going to make you feel terrible. I know that I used to love Chinese food growing up, and I thought
Hmm.
that it was not good for you necessarily,
Hmm.
but not bad for you, but it's terrible for you, right? Like
Yeah.
you eat like a big thing of this fried rice or a poo-poo platter or whatever, and then an hour you're stuffed to the gills, and an hour later you're famished. And that's just that's not good news. Are there
Yeah.
have you found because we love Thai food, Chinese food, but it's so hard for us to trust whatever restaurant we're walking into. Have you found some good ones?
Hmm.
I
You
remember
know,
you had some posts about like when you traveled finding good restaurants. Um,
yeah, it's
how do you
hard
do that?
it's hard to do Asian food.
Yeah.
Um, so I almost don't
Hmm.
like if we're going Asian food, I'm like, we probably like I know
Cheat
what I'm
day.
getting myself into.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's really like Google and Yelp are like my friends. Like
Hmm.
I always search out wherever we're traveling and I plan my vacations around where we can eat. And
Yeah.
if I know we're going to be in a certain city, I will totally research where we can eat. And there's lots of, I mean, I think you would think in the San Francisco Bay Area there would be a lot of choices
Hmm.
that are like paleo friendly, but They really aren't. I feel like when I go to other places, like when I've gone to Texas
Yeah.
and Portland and Colorado, like the choices are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And everything is clearly labeled as gluten-free, and it's not just labeled gluten-free, like they actually understand.
Right.
And so I think even just asking my readers, I'm like, hey, I'm going to be here. What are your recommendations? And, you know, there are mavens out there that are more than willing to give you advice on what their favorite place is.
Totally. Well, that's a good idea. Yeah, just like ask your own community or friends or family or
Like
whatever.
Twitter.
Yeah.
I love putting it on Twitter. I'm like, hey, I am in New York City at this corner. Where should I go?
Yeah.
Don't stop me.
We're all in this together. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Crowdsourcing is the best. Like, I think like social media, like before I did like Nom Nom Paleo or started the blog, like I didn't do any social media.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm like, social media is amazing. Like you can meet, like we met each other through like social media.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, it can be very cool, especially if you're not just kind of stewing in the drama of it all.
Yeah, you gotta just, yeah.
Yeah. But can we, how about this? Are there any like weird foods that come from your heritage or your family cooking or anything like that that you've experimented with that you think most people are missing out on?
Well, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I think home style Cantonese cooking is pretty different from the stuff that you get at the restaurants.
The poo-poo platter.
The poo-poo platter and all that fried. Like
yeah.
They just wontons. Like Chinese people don't even eat dairy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But like we used to have like whole animals all the time. Like when I say whole animals, I don't mean like a whole cow or whatever, but like our chickens always had heads and feet because my mom and grandma insisted on it because the head actually signified like good luck. And so like they would insist when we went to the Chinese market to get chickens, like the whole thing would be cooked, and like whole fish, like they would steam the whole fish, and like people would fight over the cheeks and the eyeballs and stuff, which sounds like some people like, but to me that's totally normal.
Right.
But then when I kind of mention it to people, they're like, oh my God, that's so gross. I want my filet with no skin and no bones. So those are things that I think that I grew up with that I think that people should be more okay with. Only because I think people are so disengaged from where their food comes from.
Right.
Especially animal products. So animals should be treated well while they're alive.
Yeah.
And the better they're treated, the more nutritious they will be when you eat them.
Yeah.
But you also need to appreciate that and know that this animal
did have a head.
was sacrificed.